Have you ever walked away from something, only to wonder for the rest of your life if you should have stayed? Garrett Sloan had built his life in silence, far from war, far from people, far from the voices that once blamed the wrong ones. He didn't ask for redemption. He didn't think he deserved it. But then he found her, hanging by her wrists from an old cottonwood, bruised, barely breathing. A sign nailed above her read, "No justice, just rope." She wasn't supposed to survive. She wasn't even supposed to be seen. And in that moment, Garrett had a choice. Would you ride past, like nothing happened, or would you risk everything for someone the world already threw away? This isn't just a story about the Wild West. It's about the quiet men who break their silence, and the women who refuse to die quietly. If you've ever carried regret, or questioned what justice really means, stay with us. Because some stories aren't just told, they're remembered. The wind came hard off the ridge that morning, dry, hot, and sharp as flint. It scraped through the mesquite and kicked up the red dust along the trail like it had something to say. Garrett Sloan pulled his bandana up over his nose and kept riding. His old sorrel mare, Junie, walked steady beneath him, head low, tail twitching. They'd been tracking a calf since dawn, one that had wandered too far east of the fence line. But now, Garrett's mind was elsewhere. There was a scent on the wind. Smoke, faint but familiar, and something else. He slowed the mare near a crooked cottonwood, half burnt at its base from a storm the summer before. That's when he saw it. At first, he thought it was a scarecrow, arms overhead, limp, swinging gently in the breeze. But his breath caught hard in his throat the moment his eyes adjusted. It was a girl. She hung by her wrists, bound to a thick branch with what looked like barbed wire and old rope. Her feet scraped the dirt, barely bearing weight. Her head hung forward, dark hair stuck to her face in dusty, bloodied strands, skin scorched from the sun, clothes torn, faded blue gingham now stained with brown-red. Above her head, nailed into the bark of the tree, was a jagged piece of plywood. The words were smeared in red paint, maybe blood, no justice, just rope. Garrett dismounted in silence, his boots landing heavy in the dirt. For a second, he just stood there, staring, letting the world go still. Then his instincts kicked in. "Easy now," he muttered, not even sure if she was still alive. He reached up and touched her neck gently, a pulse weak, thready but there, alive. A breath left his lungs he didn't know he'd been holding. He looked around. No footprints, no horses, just dust and dead silence. Whoever did this wasn't watching anymore, or maybe they didn't care who found her. Garrett unhooked the hunting knife from his belt. His fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from something deeper. Anger, maybe, or shame. The girl groaned, barely audible. "I got you," he whispered. One clean slice. The rope gave. Her body slumped forward like a sack of flour. Garrett caught her in his arms just before she hit the ground. She weighed nothing. Her limbs hung like wet laundry, trembling with the smallest movements. He eased her down, gently onto a patch of shaded ground, near the roots. Her lips were cracked, face bruised, blood crusted at the corners of her eyes. He took out his canteen, tipped it against a rag from his saddlebag, and dabbed at her lips. "Come on now, girl," he said softly. "Ain't your time." She blinked, one eye swollen nearly shut, the other wide and wild. She looked at him like she didn't know what she was seeing. Maybe she didn't. "It's all right," Garrett murmured. "Ain't nobody here but me." She flinched when he touched her wrists raw, torn, burned by the rope. Her breath caught in her throat, like she didn't know how to cry anymore. He didn't ask questions. Not yet. Not here. He wrapped her wrists in strips, torn from his undershirt, gave her another sip of water. Then he stood, scanned the ridgeline once more, and without another word, lifted her into his arms. The wind shifted. It rustled the plywood sign, still hanging crooked above the tree. The words stared down at him like a verdict carved in stone. Garrett stared back. Then he reached up, ripped it from the bark, and shoved it under his saddle flap. He didn't know why. Maybe someday. Someone would need to see it. Maybe someday. He would. The mare grunted as he mounted up with the girl in his arms. Junie didn't complain, just turned west toward home. The girl trembled against him. A whimper escaped her lips, like a child dreaming something too dark to name. He didn't say anything, but his jaw tightened, and his grip on the reins turned white. Garrett Sloan wasn't the type to speak unless it was needed. Folks in Red Mesa Crossing called him that mule-hearted rancher out on Brim Hollow. He rarely came to town unless supplies ran low, and even then, he barely nodded when folks greeted him. Some thought him strange. Others just let him be. Truth was, most had forgotten he used to wear blue years ago, before the scars on his shoulder and the ache in his left knee set in. Garrett rode under the flag of the Union. He'd signed up young, lied about his age, same as half the boys he rode with. He believed in the cause back then. Or maybe he just needed to believe in something after his father drank himself off a cliff. After the war, he headed west chasing something quieter. He bought land with his veteran's bonus, tucked away on the edge of the high mesas, where the soil was red and the water was stingy, built the cabin himself, post by post, shingle by shingle. He planted a few rows of corn, built a corral for horses, raised cattle when he could keep 'em fenced. But none of that's what really broke him. That happened 3 years ago. Her name was Eliza, his little sister, just turned 20. Bright smile, too big for this world. She came west to visit, just for the summer. He begged her not to. Too dry out here, he warned. Too much dust. Too many ghosts. She laughed it off. Said she needed air that didn't smell like brick and smoke. And then one night, while Garrett was out with a neighbor tracking a stray bull, the barn burned. They said it was raiders. Some blamed the Apache. Others, drunk miners from the Silver Camp. No one knew for sure. Eliza was found inside. They said she'd tried to save the horses. He buried her beneath the cottonwood behind the house. Just a stone. No words. Only he knew where. Since that day, Garrett hadn't spoken more than 5 sentences to anyone. He stopped shaving, stopped going to Sunday meetings. Even Junie seemed to carry her head lower. He told himself silence was safer. That noise invited pain. So when he'd seen that girl, Clara, hanging like some sacrificial warning, something in him cracked. Not broke, just cracked. Like an old board, weathered too long. Now, riding back toward his cabin with her in his arms, that crack felt like it might split clean open. She stirred once, murmured something that didn't form words, then fell still again. Garrett kept his eyes on the trail, hands firm but gentle. He reached the cabin by dusk. The light stretched long over the mesas, painting the land gold and bruised purple. Shadows crept like slow water. He dismounted carefully, eased Clara down into his arms again, and kicked the door open with his boot. Inside was plain. A wood stove, cot, rough-hewn table, 1 lantern. Dust hung in the air like it didn't know where else to go. He laid her on the cot, propped her head with an old pillow, and covered her with a wool blanket. She didn't wake. Her skin felt hot fever already setting in. Garrett set to work. He lit the stove, boiled water, crushed willow bark into a tin mug. He cleaned her wrists with whiskey. She flinched, even unconscious. He washed the blood from her face, moving slow, careful, like one touch too quick might break her all over again. Then he sat, just sat, on the floor, back against the wall, eyes locked on the flicker of the lamp. The silence in the room wasn't empty. It was full of unspoken things. A girl he didn't know, nearly killed for a reason no one explained. A rancher who hadn't saved anyone since the war. Garrett rubbed his temples. What the hell are you doing? Sloan. He should ride into town, find the marshal, let him sort it. That's what the law said. But something about that sign, no justice. Just rope. It wasn't justice. It was spite, wrapped in fear, masked as righteousness. And if he handed her over now, what difference would there be between him and the ones who tied that rope? He stood, reached for the lantern, and whispered, "Get some rest, girl." Then he stepped outside and laid his bedroll near the barn, just in case. The sun crept slow across the floorboards, inching toward Clara's sleeping face. Garrett sat by the stove, hands wrapped around a tin mug, gone cold an hour ago. He hadn't slept. Every creak in the wood, every gust through the eaves, had kept his muscles tense like drawn wire. She hadn't moved since he laid her on the cot last night, barely breathed. And for a while, he thought maybe she never would again. But just after first light, her fingers twitched, then again barely. Garrett rose slowly, knees stiff, boots dragging. He knelt by the cot and leaned close. Her brow glistened with sweat, skin still flushed with fever. But her lips parted. Not words, just a dry rasp of air. He dipped a cloth in the basin beside her and pressed it to her forehead. "You're all right," he murmured. "You're safe now." She stirred. Her head rolled slightly toward him, eyes fluttering half open. The look she gave him wasn't recognition. It was raw. Primal confusion, the kind of look a cornered animal gives before it bolts or bites. "Don't move too fast," he said gently. "You're banged up bad." She blinked, tried to speak, but only a croak came out. Garrett reached for the cup of boiled willow water, held it to her lips. She sipped slow, careful, then coughed. Once, sharp and dry. "That's better than nothin'," he muttered. He set the cup aside and watched her for a moment. Her features were sharp, under the grime, high cheekbones, strong jaw, lips cracked but full. If she'd ever been soft, life had stripped it from her. She opened her mouth again. Where?" she rasped. "Brim Hollow," he replied. "My ranch. I found you out by old Cotton Hook Creek." She turned her face away. Silence returned. Garrett sat back on his heels, scratching his chin. "You got a name?" he asked. "Nothing." "All right." He nodded. "You don't have to tell me." He stood, walked to the table, and busied himself, slicing jerky into a pot of beans that had been simmering since sunrise. He didn't expect her to eat, but maybe the smell would help. Behind him, he heard fabric shift, a faint rustle. He turned. Clara was trying to sit up. "Whoa. Easy," he said, moving quickly. She pushed his hand away with more strength than he expected. Her wrists shook, but she refused to lean back. "Listen," he said, crouching beside her again. "Ain't nobody gonna hurt you here, I swear it." Her eyes finally met his. They were brown, deep, and muddied like river water after a storm. He saw pain there, and defiance. She spoke, voice hoarse but firm. Why, Garrett blinked. Why what? Why'd you cut me down? He opened his mouth, then closed it again, took a breath. Because he looked at the floor. Because I couldn't not. She stared at him. You were left to die, tied up like an animal. No law, no trial, just rope and hate. A long silence followed. Then she said, They said I was one of them. Garrett furrowed his brow. One of who? She didn't answer. He sighed. Doesn't matter. Nobody deserves what they did to you. She winced and leaned back, breath shaky. He helped ease her against the pillow. They're gonna come looking, she whispered. I figured, he said. He stood, walked to the saddlebag, hanging on a wall hook, and pulled out the jagged plank, the one with red letters. He set it on the table, like a cursed relic. No justice, just rope. She was there, Clara whispered, the marshal's wife. She handed them the hammer. I saw her smile when they nailed it in. Garrett stared at the sign, his hands curled into fists. She was afraid, Clara added. Not of me. Of what it meant if I wasn't guilty. A long beat passed. I can take you to the border, Garrett said quietly. There's safe spots. South side. Old mining roads nobody patrols anymore. I can't run forever, she said. They'll find me. Garrett met her eyes. Not if I'm with you. Clara blinked slowly. Her jaw tightened. I don't know you, she said. He gave a nod. No. But I reckon that sign told me more than most words ever could. She didn't smile, but she didn't look away. For now, that was enough. The next few days came and went like wind through dry grass, quiet, restless, and hard to hold on to. Garrett Sloane moved around his cabin like a man both useful and uncertain. He chopped kindling in the mornings, fetched water from the narrow creek behind the ridge, and checked the corral fencing each dusk. But his thoughts kept circling back to the girl inside. Clara didn't speak much. Sometimes not at all. She slept in long spells, waking with a wince or a whisper. Fever came and went in waves, leaving her weaker but more alert. Her body bore signs of neglect and punishment. Rope burns, healing over raw skin. Bruises, fading like old ink. Ribs that showed too sharp under her shirt. Garrett did what he could, boiled willow bark for the pain. Cleaned wounds with warm water and cloth. He never touched her without warning. Never lingered near the cot once her breathing steadied. He slept outside every night, under the lean-to beside the barn, wrapped in his old army blanket with Junie nearby, tail flicking at flies. He told himself it was for her comfort. But deep down, he knew it was more than that. He didn't want to wake and see her gone. Or worse, see her still there, staring with those same hollow eyes that hadn't trusted anyone in a long while. Inside the cabin, life took on a different rhythm. Each morning, Garrett left a mug of warm broth and a half loaf of cornbread on the table near the cot. Sometimes Clara ate, sometimes not. But every evening, the plate was empty and the mug drained. She moved without sound, like a shadow that hadn't quite decided whether it belonged in the light. He began to notice small things. One morning, he found the blanket on her cot, neatly folded. Another day. The boots he'd left by the hearth had been wiped clean of mud, and on the third morning, when he walked in just after sunrise, Clara was sitting up, staring out the window at the hills beyond the ranch. She didn't flinch when he entered, didn't speak either. Garrett cleared his throat. Looks like the fever's breakin'. Clara gave a tiny nod. He stepped to the stove and began pouring oats into a pot. Suppose we'll get some proper food in you today. She stayed quiet. The silence between them wasn't heavy. It just was. After a while, Garrett said, place is small, but it holds. Roof leaks a little come spring. Floor creaks where the joists settled funny, but the wind don't come through the walls much. Still no answer. He tried again. Got a book or two if you read. Not much else to do out here. Clara shifted in her seat, then whispered, why Bluebird Garrett turned. She was looking at him now, not just through him. I heard you say it in your sleep, she added. Called me that. Garrett rubbed the back of his neck. Didn't mean nothing by it. Just, you were quiet, but still here. Like a bird too tired to fly, but still breathing. She looked down at her hands. He stepped closer, slow. You want me to stop calling you that? She shook her head. No. It's better than what they called me. Garrett didn't ask what that was. He didn't need to. That night, as the wind picked up and the lantern threw soft light on the cabin walls. Clara took a few steps across the floor. She stood by the shelf where he kept his books, a dog-eared Bible, a leather-bound volume of poetry, and an old military logbook he never opened. She touched the spine of the Bible, then pulled her hand back. You religious? She asked. Garrett, stirring beans by the fire, didn't answer right away. I used to be, he said. Before I figured out most men pray to things they don't really understand. Or worse, use faith to do what they already wanted to do. Clara glanced at him. Sounds about right. He handed her a tin plate, nodding toward the table. Ain't much, but it's warm. She sat across from him, picking at the beans, the cornbread, the silence. Halfway through, she said, Did you fight? Garrett paused. Spoon halfway to his mouth. Yeah, he said, too young, too angry. Thought I was doing the right thing. He looked at the fire, still trying to decide if I ever was. Clara set her spoon down. You're the first man I've seen in months who didn't look at me like I was a wound. Garrett's brow furrowed. You ain't a wound. She nodded once. That's why I'm still here. After they finished eating, she stood and walked back to the cot without a word. Garrett stayed at the table, watching the flames flicker. There was a new quiet between them now, not made of fear or weight, but of something else, something unspoken, possibility. It was just after dusk when Garrett heard her humming. The wind had quieted outside, leaving only the sound of cicadas and the gentle creak of the porch swing he never used. Inside, Clara sat by the stove, a rag in one hand, slowly polishing the old tin kettle like it was something worth saving. She didn't know he was watching. The tune was soft, something between a lullaby and a hymn, and it trembled just enough to betray her nerves. But she kept humming, even when her voice cracked. Garrett leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, listening, not intruding, just there. After a few bars, Clara stopped and looked up, caught him staring. Her mouth twitched not quite a smile, but not closed off either. That's a song my mama used to sing, she said. Used to say the land remembers it. Garrett nodded. It's real pretty. Clara set the kettle down. You look like someone who don't trust music. He chuckled, a rare sound. I don't trust anything that makes me feel too much too fast. She tilted her head. But you listen anyway. Only sometimes, he admitted. She stood and stretched, back popping like dry sticks. Then she moved to the small window by the sink and stared out into the dark. They'll come for me, she said softly. I know. You could have left me there. I know that, too. She turned to face him. So, why didn't you? Garrett thought for a moment, then walked over to the fire, took a seat on the low stool, and stared into the coals. When I found you, there was a moment, he said, just a breath. Could have turned my horse, kept riding, told myself it wasn't my business. Would have been the easy thing. He poked the fire once, embers rising. But then I thought of Eliza. Clara's voice dropped. Your sister. Yeah, he said. She was a fighter. Got herself killed trying to save horses. No one would have blamed her for leaving behind. And I was too late. He didn't look at Clara. So maybe I saved you 'cause I couldn't save her. Or maybe I just couldn't stand seeing another girl hanging for nothing. Clara walked over, sat on the opposite side of the fire. She didn't touch him, didn't say thank you, but she was closer than before. A beat passed. They called me a traitor, she said. Said I warned the Apache of a settler patrol, that I was kin to one of them. Garrett looked up. Were you? She shook her head. Mama worked at a mission school near the border. We lived near the Apache camp, grew up playing with their kids. I knew their ways, their words. A pause. They didn't like that, she added. Folks in Red Mesa said I didn't belong anywhere. Garrett stared into the flames. That's funny, he said. They say the same about me. Clara raised an eyebrow. He smirked. Don't come to town. Don't go to church. Don't fly the right flag. People need boxes. And if you don't fit, they build one for you. Or a rope, she said bitterly. They sat in silence after that, but it was a warmer silence than the ones before. Garrett tossed another log on the fire. The pop and hiss filled the space like old music. Clara spoke again. You ever been in love? Garrett blinked. That's a hell of a turn. She shrugged. Just wondering. He exhaled, long and low. Once, a long time ago, before the war, she married a man with more land and less ghosts. Clara smiled. Just barely. Smart girl. You? He asked. Clara looked down at her fingers. There was a boy at the mission. He used to sneak me stories, pocket-sized books, no bigger than his palm. He'd draw pictures in the margins. Said one day he'd take me to San Francisco. Garrett waited. He died of fever. She finished. Didn't even make it past 16. Garrett swallowed. I'm sorry. She nodded, brushing a hair behind her ear. Sometimes I think I only remember the people who leave. The room dimmed as the fire settled. Garrett stood and grabbed the kettle. You want tea? Clara nodded. If it ain't poison. He smirked. Not unless you count sassafras as lethal. As the kettle warmed, Clara moved to the cot, pulling the blanket over her legs. She didn't ask him to stay, but she didn't look away when he pulled up the stool again. She studied him under the lamplight creases around the eyes, hands like old bark, eyes like flint but kind. You don't talk much, she said. Nope. But when you do, you mean it. He looked at her. So do you. The kettle hissed. Garrett poured 2 mugs, handed her one. As she took the first sip, Clara closed her eyes. That's the first warm thing I've felt in weeks. Garrett didn't answer, but he smiled small and real. They sat that way, 2 battered souls sipping tea, as the wind picked up again outside, not safe, not saved, but starting something that might just hold. It was nearly midnight when Clara sat up, her breath uneven, the blanket tangled around her legs like a net she couldn't shake. Garrett was outside, tending to the coals beneath the water barrel. The night was cool, a rare break from the August heat, but inside, the air still clung to skin like sweat. Clara rose from the cot slowly, wincing as her bare feet touched the worn floorboards. She moved to the window, pushed it open, and let the air hit her face. Behind her, the fire popped. She didn't expect Garrett to come in, but he did. Carrying a tin basin, he set it down quietly by the stove. He paused when he saw her by the window. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. Clara shook her head. "Dreams keep coming. Or maybe memories." Garrett sat on the edge of the table, arms crossed. "Want to tell me?" She turned to him, backlit by the moon. "I will," she said, "but I need you to believe me. I already do." She studied him, searching for cracks in his voice, but it held steady. Clara crossed the room and sat on the floor, legs folded beneath her. The firelight danced across her face, no longer bruised, but still marked by something deeper. "My mama was a nurse." She began. Not a real one, no certificate, but she knew herbs, wounds, childbirth. Folks trusted her more than the preacher in some parts. She worked at a mission near the Apache camp, where the land folds near Dry Bluff. Garrett nodded. He'd heard of it. A place missionaries went when they wanted to disappear or redeem something they couldn't name. Clara continued, "I grew up between languages, learned Apache before I learned my letters. The old women there taught me how to grind mesquite pods into flour, how to treat cough with pine sap. I didn't know it was strange until we moved closer to town." She paused, fingers curling over her knees. "Red Mesa didn't care much until a white girl was found dead," she said, her voice tightening, throat cut. "Husband said he saw a shadow slip into their barn, claimed it had braids, said it was Apache." Garrett's jaw twitched. "They came for us 3 days later. Not the law, not the cavalry. Just men farmers, ranchers, town folk with loaded guns, and fear so loud it drowned reason." She swallowed. "They burned our cabin, shot our mule, dragged my mother by the hair into the middle of the yard, and beat her until she stopped begging. Said she harbored killers. Said I was one of them." Garrett looked away. "I didn't fight," she said. "Not at first. I kept saying I didn't know anything, that I wasn't part of it, but they'd already made up their minds." She reached into her blouse, pulled out a chain tarnished, thin, barely holding together. At the end hung a small silver coin, bent in the middle. "This was my mother's. The only thing they didn't steal or burn. I had it in my shoe." She let it dangle between them. "I woke up tied to a tree." Garrett's voice was hoarse when he spoke. "How long enough?" she said. "They left me as bait. For who? I don't know. Maybe they hoped the Apache would come for me. Maybe they just wanted me to die slow." Garrett stood, walked to the stove, and poured water into a tin cup. His hands shook slightly. He handed it to her. Clara took it, sipped, then whispered, "The woman who wrote the sign, she runs the church back in Red Mesa. She said justice don't come from courts. Said it comes from the hand of God." Garrett clenched his fist around the kettle handle. "My sister," he said, voice low, "died in a fire 3 years ago. Town blamed the Apache. I did too. I let that hate rot in me. Turned it into silence, into distance." He met Clara's eyes. "But maybe it wasn't them. Maybe it was just men with matches and no patience." Clara stared at him, something fragile passing through her gaze. "Why are you telling me that?" she asked. "Because I don't want to be another man who stayed quiet." They sat in stillness for a long while, the kind that didn't ache but held weight. Then Clara spoke again. "They said I took a rifle, said I was armed, planning revenge. They found an old hunting piece buried under a tarp near the woodshed. Was it yours?" She shook her head. Belonged to a neighbor. He came back after the fire, said it was stolen, but they didn't care. Garrett rubbed his temples. So, what do we do now? I don't know, she said. I can't go back, but I can't keep running either. He looked at her, then stay. Her brow furrowed. You don't even know me. I don't need to, he said, not to see what they tried to break. Clara exhaled. Then softly, she said, You ever wonder if healing makes us forget? Garrett shook his head. I think healing just helps us remember different. Clara leaned back against the wall. I used to draw birds, all kinds, my mama said when the world goes quiet. The birds still sing. Garrett gave a faint smile. You still got that in you, he said. She nodded. And for the first time, she looked like she believed it. It started with dust, a thin column on the horizon, kicking up just past the ridge. Moving steady, not wind, not cattle, horsemen. Garrett Sloan spotted it while patching the west fence line. He stood still, one hand on the top rail, watching the trail like it might change direction on its own. But it didn't. It came straight toward the ranch. He rode back fast. When he reached the cabin, Clara was outside gathering firewood, sleeves rolled to her elbows, hair tied back with a strip of cloth. He dismounted hard. Get inside. She froze. What is it, company? He said. Not the friendly kind. Clara dropped the bundle and ran for the door without another word. Garrett stabled Junie in the shed, grabbed his rifle from the hooks above the hearth, and stepped out onto the porch just as the riders came into view. There were 3 of them. At the lead was a man Garrett recognized too well, Deputy Marshal Boyd Kinney. Red Mesa's new lawman, since the last one retired, under questionable circumstances. Boyd was broad, tanned from sun and swagger, and wore a badge like it was a birthright. The other 2 riders were locals, men Garrett had seen nursing beers at May's Saloon, loyal, dull-eyed, and always just smart enough to be dangerous when told what to do. Boyd pulled up short and tipped his hat. Afternoon, Sloan. Garrett rested the rifle against his thigh. Didn't know I was expecting guests. Boyd smirked, just making rounds. Heard talk you had some unexpected company. Talk's cheap. True, Boyd said, swinging a leg over and dismounting. But sometimes it leads us to buried truths. Garrett didn't move. You're on my land, Boyd. You got reason or warrant? No need for a warrant when someone's harboring a fugitive, Boyd replied, voice smooth as snake oil. Word is, girl escaped from Red Mesa, escaped justice. Maybe pass this way. Only girl here is Junie, Garrett said flatly. She don't say much. Boyd's jaw tensed, but he kept the smile. Mind if we take a look around? I do. Garrett said. The other 2 riders shifted in their saddles. Boyd took a slow step forward. You sure about that? Garrett's hand tightened around the rifle grip. Dead sure. Silence hung thick between them. A bird called in the distance. Then, Boyd raised both hands. All right, he said. No need for blood, over a rumor. He turned back to his horse. But if the girl shows up, and she's what they say she is, you'll wish you'd helped. Funny, Garrett said. That's exactly what I'd tell you. The men rode off, dust curling behind them, like a threat. Garrett waited until they were a good mile off before stepping back inside. Clara was crouched near the corner behind the wood box, eyes wide, but steady. You hear all that he asked? She nodded. Garrett leaned the rifle against the wall, then walked to the table. He reached beneath it and pulled out the old sign, No Justice, just rope. He'd hidden it since the day he found her, unsure why he kept it. Clara stared at it. You should have given me up. I thought about it, he said, not unkindly. Would have been easier, but you didn't. No. Why? Garrett looked at her. Because I'm tired of lying to myself. He walked outside with the sign, struck a match, and held it to the corner. It caught slow, edges curling like old paper. He watched it until only black ash remained, then buried it beneath a flat rock behind the barn. That night, Claire didn't say much, neither did he, but they both slept lighter. They left just before sundown. Garrett didn't speak as he saddled Junie and a second mare he'd bought months ago, but never named. Clara moved in silence too, hands quick, face tight. She wore his old coat sleeves, rolled twice, and carried a pouch with dried beans, jerky, and a canteen. They didn't need to say it. Red Mesa wasn't done. The ride south took them through Stone Creek Valley, a dry gulch lined with brittle trees and towering stone walls. The sky burned orange behind them, and the air held that strange stillness Garrett had come to fear too quiet to trust. Clara rode ahead, her body tense but sure in the saddle. Garrett kept an eye on the ridges, every shadow a possible gun barrel, every bird call a trick of the wind. About 6 miles out, they cut west toward an old miner's trail, a route Garrett had used once to avoid patrols. It narrowed into a pass between cliffs. That's when he saw it. A glint. Then the crack. The first bullet tore through the air and struck Junie's saddle horn. She reared, nearly throwing Garrett. Clara screamed as her horse spooked, hooves skidding on loose rock. Down Garrett yelled, diving off Junie and rolling behind a scrub bush. Another shot rang out, then another. Clara scrambled to the rocks, pulling her mare with her until the animal broke free and bolted down the trail. Garrett crawled to her side. You hit? No. She panted. You... He nodded, once blood already soaking his shirt near the ribs. Garrett, I'm fine. He lied. A voice echoed from above. Ain't far to run. Sloane Garrett knew that voice, Boyd Kinney. The bastard had followed, waited, set the trap, give us the girl. And maybe we let you bleed out, Easy, Boyd called. Clara reached into the saddlebag, pulled out Garrett's old Colt. You ever fired one? He asked, eyes squinting from pain. She shook her head. No. But I ain't letting them take you. Garrett chuckled, then winced. That's the worst reason I ever heard to learn shootin'. He pressed a palm to his side. Blood hot, wet, bad. We gotta move, he said. Now. They crawled low along the cliff wall, ducking behind boulders and dry sage. Another shot cracked, missing Clara's shoulder by inches. Garrett forced himself upright, staggering forward. His breath came ragged, the world tilting slightly with each step. Somehow. They reached the narrow split in the rock face, a path too thin for horses, too jagged for fast pursuit. Clara turned and fired blindly back toward the ridge. The colt barked once, then jammed. Keep going. Garrett gasped. Pushing her ahead, they stumbled into the crevice, the light dimming with every step. The shots grew distant. Then, silence. Inside the pass, the air cooled. Shadows danced along the rock walls, and their footsteps echoed like ghosts, trying to catch up. Garrett collapsed near a cluster of boulders. Clara knelt beside him, pressing her hands to the wound. Don't you dare die on me. He grinned weakly. Bossy. She tore fabric from her sleeve, stuffed it into the wound, wrapped it tight with trembling fingers. You're gonna be all right, she said. You're too damn stubborn to die. Garrett touched her arm. You still got that coin. She blinked, then pulled it from her shirt, her mother's coin. Good, he whispered. Means we ain't lost yet. They sat in the dark for hours, afraid to light a fire, listening for movement outside the pass. None came. When Garrett finally slept, it was with his head in her lap, the sound of her breath keeping time with the wind. The cave wasn't much, just a cleft in the rock, where rainwater used to run before the river dried up. But it held, and for now, it was home. Garrett Sloane lay on a blanket of saddle pads and canvas, one arm across his stomach, eyes half-lidded. The bleeding had slowed. His skin still burned with fever, but the edges of the pain had dulled. He could breathe again, if not deep. Clara had built a fire just inside the curve of stone, smoke drifting toward a break in the ceiling. She sat cross-legged beside him, a pot of warm water in her lap, wringing out a cloth that had once been part of her petticoat. "You're lucky," she murmured, dabbing his brow. "Bullet passed clean. Another inch left, and I'd be talking to ghosts." Garrett managed a hoarse chuckle. "Wouldn't be the worst company." She shook her head. "You're a damn fool. I know." Clara dipped the cloth again, wiped gently along his jaw. They'd been hiding for 2 days. No sign of Boyd Kinney or his men. No shots in the night. No hoofbeats. Maybe they'd given up. Or maybe they were just waiting at the bottom of the pass. Garrett stared up at the stone ceiling. "You ever think about what comes next every minute? And I stopped running before I met you," she said. "But you made me stop being afraid." He turned his head slowly to face her. Clara took his hand, placed it over her heart. "My name's not Bluebird," she said quietly. "It's Clara May Ellison. My mama used to call me May when she was tired and needed me near." Garrett closed his eyes. Let the name settle. "Clara." "Fittin'," he whispered. She raised an eyebrow. "How so?" "You don't sing to please. You sing to survive." They sat in silence for a while, the kind that comes not from lack of words, but the right ones, finally having been said. "I lied to you," Garrett said at last. Clara tensed. "I said I saved you because I couldn't save Eliza. That was part of it, but not all." He shifted slightly, wincing. "I saw you hanging there, and I didn't see a ghost. I saw someone still alive. And I hadn't seen that in a long, long time." Clara blinked back, something wet in her eyes. "You gave me a name," she said. "Let me give you mine." He looked up, puzzled. "You know my name now," she said. "But I want to know yours, who you are when the war's not following you, and the town ain't looking. Who are you when no one's expecting anything?" Garrett exhaled, slow. "I'm the man who still talks to his sister when he chops wood, the one who watches his mare sleep like she might be dreamin', and the fool who don't know what tomorrow holds, but wants to see it if you're in it." Clara smiled, not wide, but real. Outside, the wind stirred the bushes, like breath returning to a tired body. Inside, Garrett squeezed her hand once, and she didn't let go. Months passed. The pass behind them grew over with sagebrush and silence. No one followed, or, if they did, they never made it far enough to matter. On the southern edge of the old territory, where the hills folded into low valleys and cottonwoods lined the creek beds like silent witnesses, a small lodge took shape. Garrett built it with his own hands, slow, careful, measured, not like a man rushing to survive, but like one finally learning how to live. Clara planted herbs near the back wall, using seeds her mother once carried in a pouch made of rabbit skin, sage, chamomile, wild mint. They gathered water from a nearby stream, fished when they could, bartered pelts for grain with travelers passing east. And for the first time in years, Garrett didn't feel like he was waiting to be punished for something he'd never done. One evening, Clara stood in the shallows of the creek, barefoot, her dress wet at the hem. She pressed both hands to her belly, just beginning to swell beneath the folds. The sun dipped low behind her, painting her in copper and gold. Garrett approached from behind, boots crunching the damp gravel. She turned and smiled, not wide, not forced, just a smile that said she was present, real. "You always this quiet before dinner," she teased. He stepped closer, just thinking. "Dangerous habit. Only when I think without you." She rolled her eyes, but her hand reached for his. He took it. "You ever miss it?" she asked. "What, the noise? The town? People?" He shook his head. "Noise don't mean much when it ain't honest." She nodded. "You're right." They stood in silence, listening to the water run past their ankles. "Have you thought of a name?" she asked softly. Garrett glanced at her belly. "Too soon. Not for thinking." She said, "Not for hoping." He thought a moment. "Then, Eliza, if it's a girl." Clara blinked. "And if it's a boy?" "Don't care," he said. "Long as he's born free." She leaned into his shoulder, resting her head there. Above them, stars began to break through the last of the dusk. Clara whispered, "I sent a letter." Garrett tensed slightly. "To who? An old friend of Mama's?" "A woman in Tucson. She knows people. Might help tell the truth, for the ones who didn't get a voice." Garrett let out a breath. "She'll print it. She'll try." They watched the creek together, not speaking. After a while, Garrett said, "You're brave." Clara smiled. "I'm just done being silent." The next morning, Garrett carved a new post near the lodge, tall and straight, smoothed at the top. No name on it, not yet. But beneath it, he buried the last piece of the past, a silver coin, bent but unbroken. He covered it with a flat stone and stood back, eyes wet but clear. "Thank you," he whispered. Not to God, not to ghosts, but to the river, because it kept running, just like them. Sometimes, the hardest choice in life isn't between right and wrong, but between staying silent and choosing to act even when the cost is high and the outcome uncertain. Garrett and Clara's story is not just a tale of survival in the unforgiving West, but a quiet reminder that justice doesn't always arrive in uniform or ride in with guns. Sometimes, it takes the form of compassion, of seeing someone the world has tried to erase, and deciding they are still worth saving. For those of us who have lived long enough to carry both regret and wisdom, their journey teaches us that it's never too late to do the right thing, to forgive, or to start again, not because the world demands it, but because the heart does. In a world that often forgets its broken pieces, it is the quiet acts, cutting someone free, standing beside the accused, offering a name instead of judgment, that echo the loudest. And maybe, just maybe, that is where real justice begins, not in the courts, but in the choices we make when no one is watching. Thank you for walking this quiet, dusty road with us. If this story moved something in you, if it brought back a memory, a feeling, or a truth long buried, we invite you to like, share, and subscribe to the channel, not just to follow more stories, but to help keep these forgotten voices and timeless echoes alive for those who still believe that even in silence, some stories are worth telling.